Shabbat Shalom. This week's Torah portion is called Toledot, and it's found in Genesis 25:19 through 28:9. And I'd like to discuss this week's portion. I'd like to start out the discussion by reading a passage. And so this is starting in verse 22 of chapter 25. And what's happening is that Rebecca has twins and they're struggling in her womb. So that's the context of where this starts. It says, "But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, 'If so, why do I exist?' She went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh answered her, 'Two nations are in your womb, two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.'" And first of all, I was curious about Rebecca's response. It seems to be a really, I don't want to say harsh, but over exuberant response to two children struggling in her womb. I've never been pregnant, so I don't know. But for her to say, "Why do I even exist if this is what's happening?" seems to be a bit excessive. And so I looked up the word "exist" to see if maybe there was some translation error that didn't accurately represent or capture the feeling of the Hebrew that was being used here. And the word here is "ze," and it's translated as this one here. So essentially, she could be saying, "Why me? Why is this happening to me?" I think that's something that a lot of pregnant women could probably empathize with. But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. And I think part of the answer is found in Yahweh's answer to her when she's asking why. It seems a little weird because his answer is like, well, your kids are going to be two nations and the older is going to serve the younger. How does that really answer the question of why me? All it is a prophecy about the two boys in her womb. And so I'm wondering if perhaps it was from this point, because the key here is that he says the older shall serve the younger. And that's exactly what happens with the deception of Isaac when it comes time to bless Esau. It's Jacob that goes instead, and he can't turn back on the blessing. And so I wonder if this is the point at which Rebecca decided that she was going to make sure or do everything that she could in her power, make sure that this prophecy happened. Now, that doesn't mean it's right. A lot of people have talked about Rebecca saying, she took matters into her own hands instead of trusting Yahweh, etc., etc., etc. I don't really want to discuss or argue that. I do know that things that seem bad, Yahweh uses for good, sometimes even plans them. The biggest thing I'm reminded of is Rahab, who lied, but her lies protected God's people. And so I'm not saying that at this point Yahweh told her to do this, but it's an interesting thought. And you see that's exactly what she does later in chapter 27. And when she, comes together with this plan, Jacob didn't want to do it. She said, "Don't worry. If you're cursed, I'll take the curse. The curse is going to be on me." And she essentially ensures that through deceiving Isaac, that Jacob is the one who gets the blessing of the firstborn. And in that blessing is very critical. Isaac says that he will rule over his brother. And so that's the exact prophetic, it's like the fulfillment of the prophecy that we see here, where it says the older shall serve the younger. And so I found that very interesting right away, something curious to think about when it comes to this story of Rebecca and Isaac and Jacob and Esau and the blessing of the firstborn. Now, there are just a couple things that are like recurring themes. We've talked about these before in prior Torah portions, and the first one is in chapter 26, verse 7. Isaac and Rebecca are traveling. They're in Gerar. And in verse 7, it says, "When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he says, 'She is my sister,' for he was afraid to say my wife, thinking the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebecca, for she is beautiful." And so this is exactly the same thing we saw his father doing multiple times. We know how that turned out, and so I found it interesting that this is happening again. I don't know what the greater significance is. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's a lack of faith thing. If it's, the sins are perpetuated from father to the children thing. Something else that I haven't thought of, but it just was kind of humorous. It caught my eye. It kind of makes me feel like me sometimes is like I make the same mistake over and over and I never learn. Or like the children of Israel, it's like you never learn, do you? And you kind of see that here. And then again, we see this another recurring theme in chapter 26, verse 25. And what's happening, this is in Beersheba, and Isaac gets a vision from Yahweh. And in verse 25, he says, so he built an altar there and invoked Yahweh by name. And so this, again, we've seen this before, where altars are being built, and there at that spot, Yahweh is being invoked by name. I don't remember any other time, any other Torah cycle where I've noticed this so much, and I'm wondering if it's happening, first of all, outside Genesis. I don't remember, because I don't remember ever having paid attention to it this much. And I'm wondering if it's even outside of the Torah. And so that's definitely something that I'm going to be paying more attention to. And if anybody already knows the answer or has some examples of scripture where this theme of building an altar and then invoking Yahweh by name, and I'm not talking about like building the tabernacle in the wilderness. I mean this specific like sentence structure, which is always the same. He built an altar. He invoked Yahweh by name. So if anybody knows of any other instances, I'd be very curious to find out and to hear where those are. Now, the other thing that I find interesting, significant, this is not something that I'm finding interesting in a curious sort of way. It's more like it's just reconfirming to me how awesome and amazing our Father is and how consistent He is and how nothing changes with Him. And this is when when he goes to bless. He's supposed to be Esau, but he's actually blessing Jacob. And so this is Isaac in 27 verse 4. And what he's saying to Esau is, hey, I'm not sure how soon I'm going to die, and I want to make sure that I'm able to give you the blessing before I do. And what he's saying is, go hunt, then prepare a dish for me, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my innermost blessing before I die. And what's curious here is that it seems like eating this meal is like a prerequisite. Because it says, so that I can. So this is very typical of entering into covenants. You eat the meal that's sealing the covenant. And so I found it interesting that, here it is, you see it. He's got to eat this meal before he blesses Esau. And then this comes back again in chapter 7, verse 23, verse 33, again, talking about the importance of the meal being the seal of the covenant. What he says to Esau, when it really is Esau who comes this time, and they realize the mistake and that Jacob's been blessed instead. In verse 33, it says, Isaac was seized with very violent trembling. Who was it then, he demanded, that hunted game and brought it to me? Moreover, I ate of it before you came, and I blessed him. Now he must remain blessed. So he's saying, not only did he bring me the meal, I ate it, and I blessed him. He has to remain blessed. We can't turn this back. He's got the firstborn blessing. There's nothing I can do. And so, very sad for Esau, I suppose. But then again, he sold the firstborn. He sold his birthright for a pot of stew. And so, you feel for him here because it says he's sobbing and sobbing. But then again, his lifestyle kind of led to this, and it was prophesied anyway. And if this hadn't happened, you and I wouldn't be where we are today with the promises that we have. Now, one last thing that I want to point out is verse 27 verses 29. This is when he's giving the blessing to who he thinks is Esau, but it's actually Jacob. And it says, let people serve you, and nations bow to you. Be master over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow to you. Cursed be they who curse you, blessed be they who bless you. And that is something that I've heard over and over and over again when it comes to Israel. And later in these Torah portions, Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and he becomes the symbol, the emblem of Israel, and of course has the 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so here is the first time that I recall seeing this phrase that comes up, and the theme that comes up again and again and again throughout Scripture, not just the Torah, that Israel, whoever curses Israel is going to be cursed, and whoever blesses Israel is going to be blessed. And so here it is. It's right here. It comes from the blessing that Isaac gives before he dies. And I hadn't realized that before. I hadn't noticed it before. It hadn't caught my eye. It was just one of those things where, yeah, I've read the blessing. I understand it. It makes sense. They're God's chosen people. Of course, he's going to curse those who curse his people and bless those who bless them. But it's more than that. This is specifically part of the blessing that Isaac gave to his son. And it doesn't matter that he thought he was giving it to Esau. He gave it to Jacob. He gave it to Israel. And the Father's will was done in this moment. And so kind of short this week in terms of what came out of this portion. There was a lot in the portion, just in terms of what I found new revelation or interesting talking points. So again, as always, I love to hear your comments. If you have any other revelation to add, resources you want to point me towards, or just back and forth discussion, I love it. I welcome it. And Shabbat Shalom.